Hi there, friends. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm doing yet another installment in the freelancer Q&A series that I do here on this channel. This is the second one from a very well lit place that we have here in Cape Coral, Florida. Today I'm doing another of these that I've been threading in here, where I take a look at a niche idea that somebody submitted to the Dead Tech site back in the day. This is the third one of something that somebody submitted with three different niche ideas. And consequently, it's the one that I felt had the most promise of these three. So if I can find it for YouTube, I'll dig up the link to the last one of these that I did. So this is the third and final question from this particular person. And so what he was asking about in this last one, idea number 3 for a niche, is I help fledgling product teams make. Wait, no, sorry, I just started reading the wrong one. I help new tech companies and universities build end-to-end prototypes to test out business ideas with concrete goals. Now, in my opinion, there is some work to be done here, but I found this one to be the most intriguing of the three, and the one I would probably be most inclined to start iterating on if I were going to pick a niche. The other two were, just to recap, helping enterprise clients design automation systems to save developers and QA toil, and helping fledgling product teams make strategic decisions about front-end code bases. So this one is about building prototypes to help business ideas with concrete goals. I like the idea of building prototypes because that's done in a very specific situation. So if you have somebody that is building out a prototype for some reason, they usually, as kind of mentioned here, they're probably going to have a very concrete goal in mind as to what they're doing with that prototype. And it won't be long before you're talking to people that you're able to start pattern matching about what that goal is. And that would, in fact, be one of the things I would recommend doing kind of right out of the gate. So, what I like about this, generally speaking, is the sort of crispness of the activity that's happening here. But let me dig in a little bit, I guess, up front to the challenges here, from a marketing and sales perspective, which is often the easiest way to tackle questions about identifying niches and having positioning, is what would you do to market and sell into these niches? Because that can quite quickly become pretty incoherent. For example, if you're saying like, well, I do Python web development for anyone who wants it, how do you market that exactly? Well, you don't really. I mean, it's commodified labor, but if you were going to market it, you do what anyone marketing commodified labor does, which is you would either claim to be the best or you would claim to be the cheapest. And in the end, the best just means that you're the cheapest in the long run. Like, hey, I'm not as cheap as these other guys, but if you hire me and you pay more, you won't have to pay later to have it reworked. So plot twist, I am the cheapest. That's really the only positioning that happens when you're commodified. So when you think about kind of identifying niches and pulling away from commodification, the big thing to think about is, what does that marketing start to look like? And it's going to start being more sophisticated. So if you're talking about helping with prototypes, that alone is going to help with marketing and positioning, because unlike commodified work, if you're doing like web development or something, and you're advertising that commodified work, people are going to have a hard time recognizing when that is needed, other than when there's some open job description. So how do you know somebody needs a Python developer? Well, there's a job opening for a Python developer and they need that. On the other hand, if you're talking about starting to tease at some kind of niche that you've identified, how do you know when a prototype is needed? Well, people might talk about that, like, oh, I'm starting a business and I want to build a pitch deck and go out and try to raise funding, so I need to prototype this thing. So you, in the way this is formulated, you do get a little bit of a hint of where there might be Rolodex moments created, or where you could potentially identify somebody in need of your services that didn't just have an open job description. So that's good. We're on to prototyping here, but the question starts to become for whom, and it is specified, but it's in two kind of diverging tracks here. And that's the first thing I would recommend doing something about. So we are doing prototyping, and either for universities or the phrasing here was new tech companies. So I guess I'm not sure if that's the same thing as like startups, bootstrapped or venture backed, or what we mean there. But let's say, yeah, I help new tech companies. So I'm guessing recently founded companies, either venture backed or bootstrapped. Now, I can't imagine two more different scenarios than like a bootstrapped or venture backed startup and a university. One is going to be brand new and subject to not much, if any, real bureaucracy here. And then the other is going to be the opposite of that. So universities are often long established institutions with a lot of bureaucracy in place. And probably depending on what's going on at the university, there might be either very much money or no money to be spent on things. So I think the very first thing I would say about this niche by way of improvement is to pick one of these. And for me to like crisp things along as much as it's possible, assuming all is equal to the person asking the question, new tech companies. So we're talking about startups. That could be anyone in any startup ecosystem, obviously Silicon Valley, but you know, there's a robust Israeli startup community. There are startup communities in, you know, New York and Chicago and all sorts of other cities. Like there are a lot of startup communities, and they might be marketing to all manner of different organizations, B2C, B2B, you know, et cetera. So who is it that you're really helping when you're talking about new tech companies? Boy, it could be anyone. I mean, that could probably even apply to like services companies. So you could be trying to help like app dev services companies that are new, build prototypes for some reason. So what I'm getting at is that tech companies concept, new tech companies, narrows it down so little that it's not really going to help in any way with your positioning and identifying the needs within a niche. Whereas universities, that's a pretty interesting premise. And I almost wish, you know, I had a live thing going on here so I could say, what made you pick universities? Because I would be intrigued to know in what scenario a university needs a rapidly built prototype of some kind to achieve some kind of goal. Because I feel like that is really, you probably have something in mind, something has come up there. And I feel like that's probably the closest thing here to a niche by far. So what are these universities doing that they need some kind of prototype in short order? That would be the thing to maybe double click on there. So that's recommendation number one. The second recommendation I would have here to tune this up a little bit is to identify what are these concrete goals. So it sounds like maybe you would come up with something like concrete goals because there are a bunch of them and you haven't pattern matched what they look like yet. And I can relate to this. So my erstwhile static code base analysis and assessment practice, I would usually go out and say, well, I can help organizations, especially like organizational leadership, make strategic decisions about code bases. And the logical question would be like, what kind of decision, Eric? And back then I would struggle with the idea of niching because I'd be like, well, what kind of decision can't I help with? Retire it, keep going, you know, evolve it into this other thing. Is it staffed properly? You know, hey, whatever you're wondering about, I can help you decide. Now, the nice thing about that is it's versatile and flexible, and it, you know, I was certainly capable of helping out in all sorts of different situations. But the downside is that isn't easily identifiable to the people that we're talking about. So if I tell you that I can help you make a decision and you say like, about what? And I say, well, anything, shoot. How are you supposed to know when I can really help you? And how are you supposed to tell other people about that? And the answer is you really can't. So you fall into this trap of being too versatile, paradoxically, creating a problem where it would actually be hard to get business because people don't, you're kind of putting a homework assignment onto them to figure out how you can be useful. Like, hey, are you facing any upcoming decisions? And the person faced with that question would say like, well, what do you mean? And that would get quickly tiresome for them. Like, what, I have to think of some kind of decision that I'm facing so I can try to figure out if I should pay you to help with it. Like, nah, no thanks. Versus if I had just really zoomed in on helping in situations like, actually, toward the end of when we were doing this, one of the things that we did start to zoom in on a little is what if we were going to help with mergers and acquisitions? Like if you're going to acquire a business, should you be worried about its code base? That's a pretty specific situation. It didn't work out for reasons I won't go into on these videos, because I was actually just talking about this today. The diligence process when it comes to acquired code bases is just jaw-droppingly lax, and nobody seemed interested in fixing it. So we didn't go any further into that, but that actually would have been a pretty good piece of positioning, because, hey, are you about to be acquired, or are you about to acquire a business? If so, we can help you reason about the acquisition properties code bases. This is a very specific situation that becomes good for positioning, that becomes good for your marketing. We could have written all about mergers and acquisitions from a technical perspective, what happens with the staff on these projects before and after the acquisitions, and so on and so forth. So what I'm getting at here is when we're talking about, something like, I help you achieve your concrete goals. In my experience, both very personal and then hearing this from other people, you'll articulate things in that fashion when you're perceiving that there's a series of goals and they seem unrelated to you, and you don't want to rule anything out. So you use this very generic language. We're zooming in on the universities and they're prototyping things for some reason. They have some concrete goal or goals in mind when they do that, but you don't want to risk closing off opportunities, so you don't specify what those goals are. Now, I think it's very critical to specify what those goals are, and partially just out of curiosity, because I'm just wondering like what universities would be prototyping that they would need to do in this fashion. The main thing that came to mind, and this is very hypothetical and speculative because I'm not super experienced. I actually did do a consulting project for a university once upon a time, but it was more about training and their staff than prototyping or anything. So the thing that I came up with right off the cuff was perhaps that it would be in the context of the government or somebody giving the university a pretty significant grant, and perhaps there's some kind of RFP process that goes along with that, where the Department of Defense wants to come up with some amazing cloaking technology for jets, and it goes to like Stanford and Carnegie Mellon and MIT and says like, all right, one of you is getting a big grant to develop this. Whoever responds to this RFP in the best possible fashion will get it. And so maybe the question asker here is talking about prototyping in a situation like that, where you're going to help a university get a grant from the Department of Defense or whatever the case may be. That is really interesting. So now it isn't that you're helping them with prototypes. I mean, you are, but that's less material, because now you're starting to get to an actual profit motive of some kind, which is to say, hey, what I really help you do here is get large grants based on these prototypes. So you're trying to convince an institution to invest a significant amount of money with you, and it's going to go a lot better if you've prototyped something out to show them in these RFP meetings. And I'm really good at helping universities get those types of prototypes in place quickly enough for those meetings. So it's important to understand there that when push comes to shove, what you're really talking about isn't helping them with a prototype. What you're really talking about is helping them get funding from large institutions. That's going to make everybody's ears perk up real quickly. And then once you say, yes, I help universities get grant funding in certain contexts, and I do that by helping them build prototypes quickly, that's actually more of an implementation detail, but it does speak to a pretty powerful niche. So, I think this is good, and I'm just kind of walking through how I would think about this and then like market and sell it. So if you zoom in on universities and then you zoom in on the goals the way I did, that I think is where you start to be onto something. Now, so in this hypothetical, if you think about the marketing and the sales process that you would have here, who your ideal customer profile is going to be. It's going to be a university. And in this scenario, it's going to specifically be a university that answers RFPs or however they go about, getting grants for funding. So you're going to want a university. You're going to want a university that tends to go in for a lot of R&D type grants. You're going to probably be looking for the personnel in this university that is responsible for doing that, which I imagine is fairly specialized. I imagine and I would be really out of school here to get too speculative about this, but I don't imagine it's just a mishmash of professors that randomly respond to these types of things. I imagine somebody at the university tends to coordinate responding to possible funding opportunities for grants, like that there's an office that does that or something. So now you've got an ideal customer profile, probably a large established reputable university, and you have a buyer established within that university, or at least somebody very close to the buyer, which would be whoever is responsible for responding to these grant situations. Now you can start to do some market research there. So what makes for a successful grant proposal and what doesn't? What are the institutions who are asking you to do this looking for? What are they evaluating? What are your current pains? Where are you falling down in this? And then presumably it's somewhere around the idea of creating a prototype of some kind. So you're really digging into that, like where do these prototypes come up short? What are some pains you've had in the past around trying to build these? What are the nightmare scenarios that have happened? Have you showed up at some kind of grant proposal thing and like tried to click through the prototype only for it to absolutely blow up and not work? So you're starting to do this research, you're starting to understand the buying landscape, and you're starting to understand your buyers and their pains. And that's going to let you tune your offerings to serve them. And it's also going to be invaluable for your sales and your marketing and winning business. So, what you would start to do in this scenario is to create content. You might go and give talks in the right context about how to respond to grant proposals. You might go give talks about how to quickly come up with prototypes that demonstrate what you need to demonstrate. You might write blog posts about that, give webinars about that, go speak at these universities, to these departments, etc. And that's really, I think, where you're getting into some truly productive territory when it comes to figuring out a niche. And then if not, all this is just speculation on my part for a demand that I don't even know that it exists. But, if it does, if you're making traction here, you can learn an awful lot and tune your offering and kind of tune everything as you go to get into more grounded territory with your offering, because you can always learn things in the process that maybe you weren't even expecting, like, hey, it turns out the prototyping isn't really the problem, but actually like formatting the PowerPoints that you put together at this presentation is, and the presentation skills of these people are actually terrible. And you might find that you wind up just kind of randomly floating into helping like techies at these universities give presentations and coaching them in presentations, assuming you would want to do that. But that's kind of what happens when you follow the market demand and follow the niches. It becomes less about your labor and what you're doing and more about identifying the gap in the market that exists, identifying the problem, and then brainstorming how you can solve that problem, ideally by bringing skills of yours to bear in a way that you find interesting. So that's my take there. I think again, of all three of these ideas, this is the most promising one, particularly if you could, I guess, do the tech companies. You got to pick one of those. Like tech company and university are so different. You're not probably going to have much success marketing to both of them. But pick the tech companies if you can get a lot more specific. But I really like the universities one. If I hadn't let 3 or 4 years go by here, I could probably ask and see, what is the story? Where did you come up with the universities? So pick one of those two. My money would be on the university. And then don't leave it at prototypes to achieve concrete goals. Get to the goals. What are these concrete goals? And then pick one or, a related pattern of these goals that you're helping them with. And then that's really your value delivery. So these universities are creating prototypes for some reason. What is that reason? What do they get from it? So, once you zoom in on that, then using your prototyping skills to help them achieve that concrete goal, that is your niche. In this hypothetical example, it was, getting grant money, but might be something else. I don't know what that is. So you definitely want to pick one of those two. You definitely want to zoom in on the potential buyer persona, the person with the need within those universities. And then you finally want to really get to what those concrete goals are. And that in the end is going to be your niche. So hopefully that is somewhat interesting for anybody watching. And if the original question asker is still out there, hopefully this is at least somewhat helpful. And I will catch you all next time.